When talking through possible topics for our Elden lore videos, we realized there were enemies we found absolutely fascinating with little to no solid information behind them. The Wormfaces, gargoyles, and golems all provide us with very little context through in-game items, but we know there's more to them than meets the eye. For today's video, we plan to give you lore on these three enemies, as we thought there wouldn't be much to dig up on them. However, while doing research for the Wormfaces, we realized between their locations, mannerisms, and item descriptions, we found enough information to provide you with an entire video on just this enemy. While we're likely still going to package the gargoyles and golems together in another video, the Wormfaces deserve their own dedicated space, and we're going to give it to them. The Wormfaces are both one of the most disgusting and interesting enemies in Elden Ring. They can be found in only three places: the Woodfolk Ruins at the center of the Altus Plateau, at Mount Gelmere, and towards the bottom of crumbling Farum Azula. When you get close to these creatures, it seems like they are eternally ill, hunched over themselves, vomiting a black liquid, or even sobbing to each other. They are an unnatural humanoid shape, with elongated limbs, blackened skin, and no real head. It's more of a neck with worm-like tendrils spilling out, covering a gaping maw that can be used to try and eat our tarnished in battle. When they do this, it looks less like they're chewing on our bodies, and more as if they're trying to suck something out of us. It would be fair to compare the look and actions of these enemies more to a leech than a worm. They sometimes carry wooden planks as weapons, but upon closer inspection you can see that these have been ripped off of caravans, likely the same destroyed caravans littering the woods they reside in. Even the lesser wormheads tower over us and create a horrifying, imposing threat that, depending on how confident you are, may be better to sidestep and avoid than to fight head-on. These creatures are undoubtedly tied to Deathblight. We can tell as much from the black liquid they vomit at us, causing this status effect to build up. We also noticed an interesting detail. Almost all of these creatures had gathered at one spot in the Altus Plateau, which just so happens to be directly above Godwyn the Golden's corpse in the deep-root depths. One can even be found kneeling before the minor Erdtree found in this location. We believe this indicates that they may worship death, or at the very least be drawn to it. This would also explain their presence in crumbling Farum Azula, as the Rune of Death lives here under the protection of Malekith, the Black Blade. We think it's likely that the Wormfaces actually originated from Farum Azula, and were brought to the lands between from the pieces that crashed below. The reason we believe this ties into our theory about their draw to the Prince of Death. We find a single Wormface at Mount Gelmere disguised as a putrid corpse, implying that the Wormfaces did not always reside on the Altus Plateau alone. It is likely they crashed all around the lands between, and at some point began a pilgrimage to where the root of Deathblight resides. Not necessarily being intelligent enough to know about the underground, they made their way to where they could feel his presence. Whatever turned this Wormface into a putrid corpse likely removed its ability to sense destined death, meaning it could not join in this pilgrimage, which is why it's the only Wormface in the lands between not found at the Altus Plateau. It's worth noting the Wormfaces in Farum Azula are slightly different from the variations we find below. Instead of wearing cloaks to hide their forms, they wear some kind of golden wrappings all around their bodies that gives them an almost mummy-like appearance. It seems clear that this clothing, if you can call it that, is specifically designed for the Wormfaces, and it's unclear how they received it in the first place. We believe this lends more credence to our theory of the Wormfaces originating from Farum Azula, as the cloth they wear in the lands between is much more makeshift and seems to be something they may just throw over themselves. There's one more theory related to the Wormfaces we wanted to dive into. We believe that they actually consume grace. One of the items the Wormfaces can drop is the gold-tinged excrement. The description of this item tells us it is someone's excrement. It has a golden tinge, often hidden in woods and thickets. Gold-tinged excrement is a highly stable substance. It doesn't dry out, nor does it lose its customary warmth or scent. For better or for worse, it remains as is. The only enemies that drop this item are tied to runes and grace in one way or another. The lesser rune bears are likely touched by grace in some way, as their fur shows runic symbols, and boars can drop the Old Fang, which links them to the primordial crucible. But why would the Wormfaces, creatures tied to Deathblight, drop an item that's likely infused with grace? We believe it's because they consume grace from trees and creatures that carry it within them. The large wormhead we find hunched over a minor Erd tree in the Woodfolk ruins can drop 2 interesting items when we defeat it. Killing this large wormface gives us the Crimson Spill Crystal tier and the Speckled Hard tier, items that would typically come from altars or defeating Erd tree avatars or ulcerated tree spirits guarding minor Erd trees. Why would this creature carry tiers tied to the Erd tree's power? We think this wormface either consumed this minor Erd tree's avatar, or it sucked grace straight from the tree itself. This also explains why their grab attack against our Tarnished is less of a biting attack and more of a sucking animation. They're trying to suck the grace directly from our bodies. This may be even more of a threat than it seems, as we know Deathblight was somehow able to kill Roger permanently. We theorize this was possible because Roger told us when we first met him, he no longer saw the guidance of grace. Without grace, we believe it's possible for a Tarnished to be killed permanently by Deathblight, and if a Wormface could suck all of the grace from us, perhaps it could kill us for good. The Wormfaces are an odd set of monsters, even for Elden Ring. Their humanoid bodies and worm-like tendrils are the very definition of horror, and in our opinion, nothing else we fight in the Lands Between is quite as disturbing. The implications of an enemy that may feed on grace in order to spread death through the land adds a new layer to the consequences of Godwyn's death. These enemies can be seen praying to something in crumbling Farum Azula, and do not move until you get close to them. Perhaps they smell our grace and want to take the opportunity to steal it from us. Maybe now that Fia is working to return death to the Lands Between, the Wormfaces see a future for themselves, and they're praying to Godwyn. We hope you enjoyed our theories on the Wormfaces and what their possible purpose may be in Elden Ring. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you have any theories of your own on these disgustingly terrifying creatures. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden Lore.